What's the kind of main message you're hoping to get across?
Well, look, we're obviously got a spring in our step because we have a Labour government. That's a really good thing. But I think the overriding message is that Labour now need to make that count. We need to make sure that Labour are Labour and they put those people who are at the back of the queue, so workers and communities, at the front of the queue. So many of the motions we've been debating this week have been about Labour delivery.
I really want to kind of explore some of those themes with you a little bit more, if I may. I know you've spoken a bit about winter fuel. Tomorrow, of course, MPs are going to be voting on whether or not it is right to kind of axe the winter fuel payments for the majority of pensioners. What's your message to any MPs who may be, I guess, struggling, wrestling with themselves about which way to vote?
Well, look, those MPs are there for their constituents, and what MPs are supposed to do is to vote for their constituents. And the issue around winter fuel is it's just totally and utterly wrong. Labour have made the wrong decision. People cannot understand. They're grappling to understand how a Labour government could choose to pick the pocket of pensioners at the same time as leaving, for example, the 50 richest families in Britain are worth £500 billion. How can you justify picking the pockets of pensioners at the same time you're leaving the extremely wealthy totally untouched? So I think that those Labour MPs should vote with their conscience.
At the same time, I guess what Keir Starmer would say, what people in Number 10 would say is no one wants to do this, but difficult decisions have to be made right now because of the economic inheritance, and it is right that better off pensioners pay a bit more.
Well, look, we are the sixth richest economy in the world, and effectively Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have choices to make. They have made the wrong choice here. If you taxed the richest 1% more, just 1% more, you'd get £25 billion. That would deal with the black hole and you'd have £3 billion over. This is about choices. We're a rich country. We should not be pitting workers against pensioners in the way that we are. We need to do it in a very different way, rule out austerity and really do a U-turn now on the winter fuel policy.
You say there, rule out austerity. We, of course, have got Rachel Reeves' first big fiscal statement coming up. If she sticks to her fiscal rules, as we believe she will, as she said she will, it's going to be quite a painful one. Do you think it is going to be austerity 2.0?
I don't think the countries will forgive Labour if they take us to austerity Mark II. The reason people almost crawled to the polling station, they were on their knees, crawled to the polling station, is because they wanted change. These fiscal rules are self-imposed fiscal rules. Fiscal rules have changed 9 times since 1997. You can change the fiscal rules. That is not a problem. What we need to do now is to look at the economy in a completely different way. We're a £2.5 trillion economy. We should not be putting ourselves into a situation where pensioners are scared to put on their heating.
At the same time, though, you're talking about there why people voted for Labour. People elected Labour on a platform of fiscal discipline. Rachel Reeves, as Shadow Chancellor, now Chancellor, was very, very clear about what she was going to do. So wouldn't that be going against the mandate that Labour has won if they start increasing borrowing, for example, as Unite has mentioned, or like bringing back the magic money tree?
Well, look, borrowing to invest, and most economists would say that actually borrowing to invest is a good thing. After the Second World War, we had a 250% debt to GDP. We built the NHS, we built the welfare state. Nobody there was saying, look, we can't afford it. We went on to build those things and be prosperous. We can do that again.
But my point is, though, that that's not what people voted for at the last election, because Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer were very, very clear that they were going to have these fiscal rules. So, they have got a mandate to impose, they wouldn't describe it as austerity, but to stick to those rules and to stick to that discipline.
Well, I actually don't think that's what the mandate was for. The mandate was for change. The mandate was for change. We didn't go into minutiae about fiscal rules. The mandate was for change. And I can tell you very clearly that nobody I'm speaking to in the pubs and bars, in everyday places, for example, here in Brighton and beyond, actually thought that Labour would come in and pick the pockets of pensioners. They certainly didn't think Labour would come in and drown us in austerity Mark II. Tough choices cannot be code for cuts. It's as simple as that. Nobody who voted Labour would have thought we'd been going down this road. Now, look, Labour are going to do some good things. I believe that they can do some good things. But if you start walking down the road of picking pockets of pensioners and ignoring something like a wealth tax, then quite frankly, the country will not understand why a Labour government are doing that. And that's the problem that Labour will have.
I'm interested in what you're saying about working class communities and about workers in particular. And I was quite struck by something you wrote in The Observer this weekend about the riots we saw over the summer. You said, if you kill hope, if you abandon working class communities, you create an open wound of discontent that the scapegoaters will stick their fingers in. And this is how support for right-wing nationalism grows. I just wondered if you could expand a bit on what you mean here.
Well, look, I mean, I am with workers and communities all the time, up and down the country, in different parts of the country. And what's really clear is that Labour have got one shot to deliver. They've got one shot. Because if they don't deliver and people are still in the same situation that they are now after 14 years of the Tories, that they cannot see hope and the light at the end of the tunnel, then obviously they will look to somewhere else. They will look to somewhere else. And actually, Labour's got a huge responsibility on its shoulders. Because if you've got some of these communities that have been abandoned for years and they're looking around and nobody is there to help them, then obviously they will look over their shoulder to see who else is speaking to me, who else can I go towards. So Labour's got a massive responsibility. They need to deliver.
Now, you're the first Unite leader to work with a Labour Prime Minister for, what, 14 years? Are you speaking regularly to Keir Starmer? How's that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I first met Keir, before he was the Prime Minister, I had just got in to be General Secretary, the first woman General Secretary of my union. I spoke to him about the fact that my job was to defend workers, and I would do everything in my power to defend workers and defend jobs. And sometimes that would mean that we would clash. Sometimes that would mean that we would not agree. But my job isn't to sit there sucking my thumb when I can see things going wrong in front of me. We're the biggest affiliate to Labour, so we have a voice, and I want to use that voice because I want the workers' voice to be heard. So yes, of course, I meet Keir, I've met a lot of the Secretary of States. We're in the room. We've done some very good work on the New Deal for working people, some very good work on the steel industry, some very good work in terms of what's coming up in some of the British investment areas. So there's good stuff going on, but we need to have money to invest for jobs and we need to have money to invest for public services. If you can't do those two things, people won't see change.
You mentioned there that you're the biggest affiliate to Labour. You obviously give them an awful lot of money. Is that something that's just a given, or is that something that you keep under review?
Well, look, it's in our rule book that we're affiliated to Labour, so the affiliation to Labour is almost like paying for gym membership. You know, we're affiliated to the club, if you like. What we didn't do in this election, which had been done previously, I said when I got in there'd be no blank cheques for Labour, so we didn't give money in centrally to Labour for this election, primarily because of their stance on oil and gas workers and the fact that we were not going to have jobs before the guillotine of licences. My primary function is to defend workers, and so therefore we didn't give as much money that had gone before. We tended to give it to MPs. Obviously things are under review, but to be honest, it's a red herring. You know, that part of the conversation is a red herring. My job is to make sure I defend workers, and I will do everything in my ability to do that to make sure that workers get the best deal possible.